Well, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everybody, wherever you're coming from. My name is Lisa Doherty. I am a volunteer at the Clifton Park Library, and I've been doing this webinar series for, I think, almost 2 years now, monthly webinar on the second Monday of every month. Today's topic, we are going to go with the St. Patrick's Day theme, and we're going to talk about Irish immigrants. This is a topic that is near and dear to my heart, of course, as any of you who know me know, this is what I do. And so I can usually talk endlessly about this topic. But today we're going to examine a couple of things that might be very helpful to you as Irish researchers. So one of the things that is very common, and one of the things that almost everybody who researches their Irish ancestry finds out very quickly, is that many of the records that we use for finding out information about our ancestors are the ones that say only Ireland. So if you're looking for a place of birth, a lot of times those records can be very frustrating in that they only just tell you the country. They don't tell you anything more specific. And when we're doing our research into our Irish immigrant ancestors, probably the biggest goal for most people is to find a more precise place of origin rather than just Ireland. Because of course, everybody really wants to know where their ancestor came from, and they want to know a little bit more about that area where they came from. And when you're seeing records that all they say is Ireland, then of course you know that's not terribly specific, and you'd like to find something a little more specific. So one of the big motivation behind doing this particular presentation is because I wanted to talk about these two sources that are fairly underutilized. And they're just not something that you're going to find mentioned in a lot of the information about doing genealogy research, and even particularly Irish genealogy research, because both of them are fairly locality specific. So these two databases, one is from the New York Immigrant Savings Bank, and the other is from the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. Both are fairly geographically limited. The Massachusetts one, I would think, would be a little bit more geographically limited than the New York one. But the Immigrant Savings Bank records tend to be for those who settled in the New York City area. So places like the New York City 5 boroughs, sometimes New Jersey, sometimes Long Island, sometimes Westchester County. But you're going to find most of these people were city dwellers and lived in the city. For the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters, you're going to find a heavy concentration of people that settled in Boston, but you will also find them throughout the state because there were foresters chapters in different cities, not just in Boston. So you will find a bunch of them in different areas of Massachusetts. Both of these organizations were things that people had to voluntarily sign up for. So it wasn't something that was an automatic. People had to go and seek them out in order to participate in both of these institutions. So if your ancestor or if a family member of your ancestor was in either of these areas, then I would highly recommend looking at these resources. So we're going to talk about these resources in a little bit more detail. So starting out with the Immigrant Savings Bank. The Immigrant Savings Bank is exactly what it sounds like and exactly what it's named as. It was a savings bank set up specifically for people who had immigrated to the United States from Ireland. It was established in New York City in 1850. This is a fairly significant date in that it was shortly after the famine and shortly after a very large amount of Irish immigrants had come into the city. They were looking for a place where they could safely house their money, where they could safely do transactions and send money back to Ireland to their family members. So they needed a place where these types of things could be facilitated. So that's why the bank was set up. It was founded by 18 members of the Irish Immigrant Society, which was a society that was set up to aid recent immigrants that had come to the city. Of course, there was a very large number. The bank still exists today. It is the oldest savings bank in New York City. And it was the largest privately held, family-owned and operated bank in America as of 2019. So it still is in existence, and it's now called the Immigrant Bank. So if you go to New York City, you will see that name on the building called the Immigrant Bank. The purpose of the bank was to provide aid for the large numbers of Irish immigrants coming to the city. It was to make it easier for them to deposit and send money. It was set up to provide a friendly and non-discriminatory place to conduct everyday financial business. Because you can imagine in this time period, there was a lot of anti-Irish sentiment in New York City. And so the Irish would have been discouraged from depositing their money in traditional banks. They would not have wanted to approach such an institution. They wouldn't feel comfortable there. So this bank was set up specifically to deal with their financial needs. And this was a place where they could go and feel confident that their money was taken care of and that it would be safe for the time when they needed it or for when they needed to send it to their relatives in Ireland. So it had a very, very Irish purpose for being set up. The one good thing, and one of the good things about this institution, was that extensive records were kept about the depositors. So if someone was to go and open an account and deposit money in the Immigrant Savings Bank, there would have been a certain amount of information that was taken down about them. And these records, fortunately, have been made accessible to people doing research. They were donated originally to the New York Public Library, and then they were digitized and indexed by Ancestry. So that's where you will find the collection today on Ancestry.com. So if you do not have your own subscription to Ancestry, you can almost always use Ancestry.com in one of the libraries around the area. And the Immigrant Savings Bank records are part of the library's subscription to Ancestry. So you can access them. It's not a problem at all. So these are actually fairly straightforward to use. Ancestry's collection covers the years 1850 to 1883. And this is a fairly narrow window of time, but this would have been the time when we had the most people depositing and when we have the most people setting up accounts. There are 4 different types of volumes that Ancestry has in their collection, and they are going to be only some of them are going to be useful as far as information about the immigrant is involved. They are digital images of handwritten pages. So you are going to have to be able to read handwriting. In general, I find that the handwriting isn't terrible. Sometimes you will see record sets where the handwriting is just downright awful. And on these, I have not encountered any handwriting that has been very difficult. If anything, it tends to be a little small. So you may have to enlarge the images in order to be able to see them better. But that tends to be the worst offense of the handwriting, is that it tends to be a little small. They're trying to cram in a lot of information on a smaller space. They are searchable, so you can search them by last name. Again, we have to be mindful of spelling when we're searching, because spelling is not at all uniform. You will find lots of different spellings, even in entries that concern the same people. So you may, for example, if you're looking up your ancestor, William Riley, you may find one record for him that's spelled R-I-L-E-Y. You may find another record for the same William Riley that's spelled R-E-I-L-L-Y. So you really have got to be mindful and keep an open mind when it comes to spelling. This collection is available, as I mentioned, to search through your home subscription to Ancestry or on the Ancestry Library Edition, which is available at most of the libraries in the area. So the 4 volumes that Ancestry's collection consists of are the index books, which are exactly what they say. They're indexes to the other books. So these names that appear in these books are also going to appear in the other books. The test books, which are going to have the most of your information about your ancestor, those cover the years from 1850 to 1868. And you're going to see that these books can have a lot of biographical information about individual people. The transfer, signature, and test books cover the years 1850 to 1883. And those were used for recording changes to an individual's account. So if someone transferred their account to someone else, or if they closed their account, then that would be covered in these books. Then there are deposit and account ledgers. These are arranged by account number, but again, these can also be searched by using a search engine and putting a name in. And this is going to give you the account history for each individual. So all of their deposits, all of their withdrawals. So basically the financial information about the person is going to be provided in the deposit account ledger. So for genealogical purposes, the most important volumes are going to be the test books, and those are going to be the ones that will have the most information about an ancestor. So to illustrate what we can expect to find in these records, I'm going to do just take you through a little case study of someone that I researched using these books, and his name was Michael Conway. Okay, fairly common name, not the most common, not the most uncommon. So we're looking for Michael Conway. So we're having some problems with researching Michael because first of all, he lives in New York City. So that's a real issue for a lot of people because it's a huge place. And if there's one Michael Conway, there's probably 3 or 4. So how do we differentiate? We have a fairly common name. There's lots of different spelling variations. Could be Conboy, Conroy, Conway, Convey, all different kinds of names. And yes, these absolutely are spelling variations of Conboy. Our information that we have about the family is vague. It's unsourced. It's come from family members and online family trees. So we're not really sure that we can even trust any of this information that we already have. It's just kind of sketchy. And to go along with this, we have uncertain dates of marriage and death for Michael. So we have a vague idea of when he got married and a vague idea of when he died, but we don't have anything in concrete. And then we also have an unidentified fan club. And when I talk about the fan club, I'm talking about the concept of cluster research. Cluster research means that we want to develop a network of people around Michael Conway. So we not only want to be researching Michael Conway, but we want to be researching people that have any association with Michael. So the fan club stands for family and friends, associates, and neighbors. All of those people could have potential importance to our research on Michael Conway. So if we can't find a lot of information about him, we may be able to find more information about people that he was related to, people that he lived with, people that lived next door to him, people that he worked with, etc. So a lot of these people all together make up a fan club or make up a network of people around Michael Conway. So we need to have some idea of some people that we can use to research to help us with finding out about him. So the fan club, as I mentioned, friends and family, associates, and neighbors. This is a term that was first originated with a genealogist named Elizabeth Shown Mills. And she used the fan club to describe cluster research. And if you are researching your Irish ancestor and you have not yet started doing cluster research, I can guarantee you it's probably going to be essential. Very rarely do we find information about an individual Irish ancestor that is not in some ways dependent on other people in his fan club. So if I'm researching Michael Conway and I'm not finding a lot of information about him, I'm going to have to cast a wider net. I'm going to have to look for people around him that I can research. So we need to keep that in mind when we're researching people. We need to be always on the lookout for people that we can add to the fan club. Because of course, we know our ancestors did not just come to the United States and live alone in a little room by themselves. No, they had a network of people around them, and those people are very important to discovering their story. So one of the things we do when we're looking for people is we look at census records. So here we are looking at census records, and we find Michael Conway here as he's spelt, and we know kind of, roughly that his wife's name was Mary, even though this says M here, not very helpful. And we know a little bit about his children's names, and this fits with what we know. So we can say, okay, this is probably our guy. So if we're looking at our census records, we can look just above him. There's a W, Conway. Okay, well, let's think about this. Possibility that they could be related. Because, it's kind of maybe too much of a coincidence that these two names that are so close would be appearing so close together in a census record. So I'm going to just maybe think, okay, maybe they're related. So we've got Michael abbreviated, and we've got WM abbreviated, which looks like it's probably William. All right, so we've got a William Conway and a Michael Conroy. So if we start looking around for some naturalization records, okay, here we've got a Michael Conway naturalization, and his address, as written on here, is 241 West 35th Street. And this looks like it matches an address from a city directory of Michael Conway. And we can see down at the bottom, there's a William Conway that is a witness to this naturalization. Okay, well, now this is looking more and more like our people from the census are probably related in some way because they're living near each other, they have similar last names, and now William is serving as a witness to Michael's naturalization. So there's probably a connection here. So we look in the Immigrant Savings Bank records and we look for Michael Conway, and we don't find anything. So we're thinking, okay, well, there's no Michael. So what do I do now? Well, we think, hey, we've got William, and we know he's very likely a part of Michael's fan club, and he's probably a very close associate. So let's look up William. So here we are. We've found William, and his address is 241 West 35th Street. Again, same address as this naturalization record. So we've got this address. This is the same Michael Conway. So another thing we can see from this entry is it's giving us his occupation, which is a contractor. It's giving us his year of birth, which is 1824. It's telling us where he's from, Clune, County Leitrim. And it's also telling us about his marital status. He's married to Bridget Smith, and he has 2 children. So if we go back to our 1860 census, we can see that this William Conway is married, and he has 2 children, Emma and Mary. And who's living with him? Patrick Smith. And what is his wife's name on the Immigrant Savings Bank records? Bridget Smith. So this is looking more and more like this person is related. So the address matches, the marital status matches, the fact that he has 2 children matches, and then we've got the name Smith coming up in 2 different places, in this record and in William's home in 1860. So this is looking really good. So since we know now that William Conway was from Clune in County Leitrim, we can probably assume that his very close relative Michael was probably also from the same place. So we can infer from all of these collection of records that William and Michael Conway were neighbors in New York City with a similar surname. William served as a witness for Michael Conway's naturalization. William and Michael were close in age. William was from Clune, County Leitrim, and so Michael might be from there too. So again, it's collecting this information, using the fan club, and then applying that same information to our ancestor. So just to reiterate this, now we've got some good information about William Conway. We know that he's from Clune in County Leitrim. So we can take this in a couple of different directions. We could go and we could look for documents that might name the parents of William and Michael. Those would be marriage records or their death records. If we could find either one of those 2 things, they may very well name the parents of William and Michael. And again, now we've got 2 ancestors to work with instead of just 1. So even if we don't find a death record or a marriage record for one, we may be able to find one for the other. So just having more people to research increases the chances that you're going to find a pertinent record. The more ancestors, the more records, the better the information. So it just is a law of numbers. So that's a really good example of how we can use the fan club and how we can use the records of the Immigrant Savings Bank to try to find out information about not just our ancestor, but about his network of people around him. So another really cool thing is this particular website, Beyond Rags to Riches. It has a very interesting thing on it. It's called Tracing the Famine Emigration from Ireland to New York. And what it does is it uses the information from the Immigrant Savings Bank records and it maps it out. Oops. So here it is. It takes the information from the Immigrant Savings Bank records, places of birth of Irish immigrants, and it takes them from New York City to Ireland. So all of those little dots that you're seeing on the right that are represent people that were depositors in the Immigrant Savings Bank. And then those dots are transferred over to the Irish map to show you where those immigrants in New York City lived and where they came from in Ireland. So I think this is just fascinating use of data. Again, I will go back to that website. It's this website here. If you take a screenshot of this, you'll be able to see the website and go to it. And I would highly recommend looking around it. It's a really great resource and it's very interesting. Great use of data. So that's a little bit about the Immigrant Savings Bank. So moving on to the Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. So again, this is going to be fairly locality specific to the state of Massachusetts. And this organization was founded in Boston in 1879. And chapters quickly grew up around the state in Massachusetts. Massachusetts has a fairly large amount of Irish immigration. And again, if your ancestor didn't necessarily live in Massachusetts, it doesn't mean that maybe someone who is related to him did not live in Massachusetts, because that's always a possibility. It was a large port city. Lots of Irish immigrants came in through Boston. Not as many as New York, but lots did come in through Boston. So this was also an organization that was founded by a group of Irish immigrants. And it was set up specifically for the purpose of providing life insurance for its members. So a lot of times this was back in the day before there was any kind of disability type insurance on the workplace, or there was no unemployment insurance. There were really no safety net for workers. So what people did was they would buy life insurance policies through organizations such as the Foresters Society, and they would have their money in a safe place so that if anything did happen to them and they were not able to work, or for when they died, there would be sufficient money to be able to provide for their family and for their burial. So that's what this organization was all about. It was for providing money for people that needed it in the case of their main family breadwinner being disabled or dying outright. So this organization was set up for that benefit. By 1930, the organization had grown to 60,000 members, and there were branches in cities and towns throughout Massachusetts. So if you were going to take out a policy with the Foresters, you had to complete an application for coverage, and this would include personal data, family information, and a physical exam. So similar to what we do these days when we want to take out a life insurance policy. Maybe not quite as stringent in those days, but this is what they had to do in order to take out an account with the Foresters. So the records themselves were obtained by the Irish Ancestral Research Association in 2004. They were granted ownership of the records to preserve and make them accessible to researchers. So that's what they did. The Tierra members took the index, they took the records, and they created an index to the records to make them accessible for everybody. And they made this index available on their website. And for many years, you could go to the Tierra website and you could access the free index and be able to find your ancestor in it. But in 2011, the records were moved to the Joseph Healy Library at the University of Massachusetts for preservation. And since then, those records have the index that was created by the Irish Ancestral Research Association has been hosted on the library's website. So that it's there now if you want to research it. So you do need to go to the University of Massachusetts Boston.edu website to access the index for the records. And the reason for this is simple. That's because when you find what you're looking for in the index, then the library is going to be the facility that's going to provide you with the actual records. Because what you're looking at is only an index at this point. Okay, we have a question. Okay. Oh, the rags to riches link isn't working. You should just be able to Google it, and it should come up. If you Google Immigrant Savings Bank and then rags to riches, it may come up that way. So again, we're going to be accessing an index online, and the index is just going to have some basic information about the people, enough so that you can figure out who you're looking for. So we're going to do a case study, and this time we're going to talk about James McCarthy, and we're going to talk about the Order of Foresters and James McCarthy. All right, so we're researching James McCarthy. All right, so what are the problems that we're having when we're researching James? Well, extremely common name for starters. How many James McCarthys do you think there are in Boston? Many, many, many. Large city, lots of people, many James McCarthy, James McCarty, James Carthy, James Carty, you name it, there's lots of them. He died after 1915, so there is no death certificate available online because Massachusetts cuts off their death certificates after 1915, around there. I know they are slowly adding more of them as we go on, but after 1915, it's a little sketchy. And since he died after 1915, we can't get his death record online, and therefore we can't find out his parents' names from that source. His 1870 civil marriage record does not give his mother's maiden name. Hooray. It just gives father's name and mother's first name. Doesn't give her maiden name. We don't have any identifiable siblings or relatives other than his immediate family. So we don't know of any brothers or sisters. We don't know of any parents. We just know about his wife and his children. That's it. So we don't know anything else. So fortunately, we were able to find a newspaper death notice for him. Okay, so he died in 1916, and we were able to find this very helpful little death notice. Doesn't tell us a lot. Just says 2 sons and 3 daughters survive him. But it does give us a very, very, very important piece of information. He was a member of St. John Court, MCOF. And you have to, of course, be able to be up on your acronyms, or you just simply Google it. And then you find out that MCOF stands for Massachusetts Catholic Order of Foresters. So at this point, I'm doing the happy dance because I know that there's going to be some great information about James McCarthy in this database. And, you know, when you are dealing with a very common name, you need all the help you can get. So with this is a gold mine. This is awesome. So I'm immediately going over to look at the Foresters Records search. And this is what the search looks like. You can add as much or as little information into it as you want. So if I were coming into this search and I was just going to put in James McCarthy, you can imagine how many hits I would get back. But I know that the court name was St. John. So this is going to be very helpful to me because I know that we have a court name. So we know that he's not in any of the other 30, 40, 50 courts that there are. We know that he's in this particular court. So that's a wonderful thing. So we do the search, and this is what comes up. We've got one James McCarthy. He's living in Hyde Park, and he's in St. John Court. So we know that this is him. So it tells us his birth year. It tells us initiation date, which would be the date that the policy was taken out. His death date, which corresponds with what we know from the death notice. And then it gives us some information about the court. And then it gives us his presumed county of birth as Waterford. Beautiful. That's something we didn't have before. And we could stop here, but why would we want to do that? We know that there's a whole bunch of paperwork associated with this particular index entry. So let's request the whole record. So to request a scanned copy of the records behind this index entry, we're going to send an email to the library. You're going to include the death claim number as listed in the record detail. as well as any other detail that's given. So as of right now, and I'm pretty sure this is still true, they are not charging for scanned copies of these records. I think prior to COVID, they were charging a minimal amount, might be $5. I'm not sure. It wasn't much. But now, as of 2021, they have not been charging for copies of these records. So all you need to do is send them an email with the pertinent information, and they will send you back scanned copies of the records. So when I got the scanned copies for James McCarthy back, they included 11 pages. So that's pretty cool, 11 pages. I ordered them on the 23rd of October, 2020, and they arrived on the 13th of November, 2020. So that's really great turnaround as far as records go, and especially considering that a lot of places have been short-staffed. This is really incredible turnaround. The scans were very high quality and they were easy to read. And best of all, they contain personal information about James and his family and his beneficiaries. So keep in mind that without these documents, I'm not getting anywhere about James McCarthy because his name is so common. So in the documents that were included are a mortuary record, which would be similar to a death record, his application and medical examination when he took the policy out, his application for membership, his order of forester's certificate of death, and a list of beneficiaries. So people that would benefit from the money that was paid out when he passed away. So here is his application for membership, and it gives his exact county of birth and his exact, in quotes, date of birth, because we know when we do Irish genealogy that dates are never exact. So this is a roundabout date of birth. Gives information about what his occupation was and his address. Gives his age as well. So then we have this very interesting family history section, which I think is great. It gives lots of really great information. Like it gives his mother's, on the top line it says father, and it gives his father's age, and it gives his father's health as good. So this indicates that in 1894, when James filled out this application, his father was still living, which is really good information. His mother died in 1877. She was at age 65, and she died of old age. So it's helpful to know that his father was still living and that his mother was deceased. He had two brothers living. They are ages 52 and 50, and he has one sister living, age 41. It also gives you some interesting little things here. What parent do you resemble? And it says mother. I think that's a really interesting kind of thing and something you would never be able to find out from any other source. It also has a section about grandparents, how old they were when they died. And there's not a lot of information given here, but he does know that his father's father lived to age 91. So clearly there are some good genes on the paternal side here because his father is 81 and still living, and his grandfather died when he was 91. So this is all really good information that you can use to further research this person in Ireland. And also it's just great information to have. And again, something that you would not get from any other source. So we can find out from this information that James was born in County Waterford in 1847. And if I were guessing, if I were working on someone named McCarthy and I was guessing, I would say they came from Kerry. That would be my guess because McCarthy is an extremely common name in Kerry. It is not a terribly common name in Waterford. It's all over the country, truthfully, but it is not as common in County Waterford as it is in County Kerry. His mother died in 1877. His father was still living. He had two brothers and one sister still living. It would be helpful if they gave names for them, but I'm not going to get too greedy here because we've got some really good information. So here's our surname distribution map of Ireland. So you can see Kerry and Cork are just full of McCarthys. They're, you throw a stone and you'll hit one. There's so many of them. But if we look at County Waterford, which is on the east coast of Ireland, you will see there are not as many McCarthys. So when I go looking in County Waterford records, I'm not going to be finding McCarthy after McCarthy after McCarthy. There's going to be fewer, and so they're going to be easier to pick out. So we can go into Irish records. We can search for the death of a female McCarthy in 1877 somewhere in Waterford. We can look for the death of James's father after 1894. We can look for McCarthy's living in County Waterford in 1901. So we've got a few possibilities of things that we can look at in Irish records based on the clues that we found in the Forester's record. So that is the presentation, and I'm hoping you have some questions for me and about what types of things you can do from these records. You're going to get variation, of course, in the records. You're not going to get everything all the same. Maybe some more specific information, maybe some less specific information, but in general, this is what you can expect to find in these records. And I would urge you to look through them, even if you don't have any immediate ancestors that were either in New York City or in Boston. I would urge you to maybe take a look and see if there are any people that might ring a bell as possible relatives. It's going to be easier to figure that out with the New York City records than it is with the Boston records, because you're only dealing with an index in the case of the Boston records. But in the New York City index, I find people in this area, in the area of Albany, New York, I find that there's quite a bit of family that lives in the New York City area. So there's a lot of back and forth between these two areas. So you may very well find some relative in the Immigrant Savings Bank records in New York City. So it is definitely worth a look. So if anybody's got any questions, doesn't have to be about this particular presentation, just any questions in general while you've got me here, please feel free to ask. I'd be glad to answer. And if there's any other slides I can put back up, let me know. Okay, Jeremiah is saying, I would like to establish a connection to the Irish in my last name via New York State. Okay, that's going to be a process. Did your ancestors come to United States? Or come to New York? If they did, you might be able to find them in census records. That would prove that they lived here. And then from there, you can use more localized records to figure out more about them. So really, it's going to be a matter of starting with yourself and working backwards and figuring out where all of those people lived and lots of facts about them. So I usually recommend the census is a good place to start looking for those connections. Anybody else have any questions?
I'll just remind people that on April 11th, Lisa will be talking about the 1950 US Census. And on May 9th, she'll be talking about getting the most from your sources. So keep an eye on our calendar for that as well.
Okay, one question is, do you know if there were similar organizations in the Pittsburgh area? I do not off the top of my head. But that might be something that certainly you could look into. I would suggest possibly the Family Search Wiki for information on those organizations. It's possible if you go into their catalog on Family Search and you search location Pittsburgh, there may be some information about Irish organizations in the Pittsburgh area. You might also want to reach out to some of the libraries in the Pittsburgh area. They might be able to answer that question more specifically. They may have some knowledge of those types of organizations. And then there's another question about what about Irish relatives who arrived in the US via Philadelphia? Okay, so if you're looking for passenger lists going into Philadelphia, those would be available on Family Search and on Ancestry. So you can search both of those places for those things. There's quite a few records for Philadelphia online. I know that Family Search has a large collection of Philadelphia records, so that might be a good place to look for records of people in Philadelphia. A lot of it is going to be establishing where people lived, and the census is going to be a great tool for you to use to find out where people lived. Because once they came to Philadelphia, they may not have necessarily stayed there. They may have gone somewhere else. They may have gone somewhere first and then settled in a different area. So sometimes they don't always stay where they come in. And sometimes there's a transitional place between where they arrive and where they finally settle. So those are also things to take into consideration. A lot of people that came into Philadelphia or into Baltimore settled in the Midwest. Those tend to be ports where people that were headed for the Midwest came into. Again, no hard and fast rule, but just in general. So any of those kinds of those resources would be recommended. Is it difficult to find the MCOF index on Tierra? You have to go and look on the University of Massachusetts library, the Hurley Library at the University of Massachusetts. If you go to the Tierra website, you can find it under projects, and they are going to funnel you to the library's website. So when you get to the Tierra website under projects, they are going to redirect you to the library's website. So it should be able to be findable there. You do have to do a little digging on the Tierra website. I believe, like I said, it's under projects because that was a project that they were working on and that they did. So you should be able to find it from there.
We have some questions in the chat as well.
Okay, great. Let's see. Chat. All right. Okay. So yeah, doing the Troy, the presentation afterwards. Yes, this will be available on the library's YouTube channel. And Judith is asking, what do you do when information from church records differ from other sources for the same person? Okay, I guess I would have to know how they differ in order to answer that question. Are we talking about a different name, different date, different people associated with it, different parents, different spouses? That, you know, there are naturally going to be variations. So sometimes there are out and out differences. If they can be classified as differences, then maybe you're not looking at the same person. But if they're variations, then you could very well be looking at the same person. So dates of birth. Oh, dates, you don't even bother looking at them. Dates are extremely fluid. So they are probably even more fluid than names. Generally, the most reliable source for date of birth is going to be a baptism record. And not all baptism records have exact dates of birth on them. But since baptism occurred usually within 1 or 2 days of birth, that can be used as what we would call a quote unquote birth date. So you may see the baptism occurred on December 5th, 1843. Okay, so that record has been created within a day or two of the child's birth. You may see in American Census Records that the person was born in 1847 or that the person was born in 1850. Your most reliable date is going to be that baptism date. So it doesn't matter what the age appears to be on American Census Records. Your most reliable date is going to be the one in the baptism records. That being said, it's good to allow as many as 10 years either way when it comes to ages. So if somebody in the 1850 census says that they're 50 years old, then their birth date is going to be anywhere from 1790 to 1810. So keep about 10 years either way in mind. A lot of people think that that's extreme. But just a quick story, one of the things I did as a kind of an exercise was extracted everyone's name from a 1901 census record of a particular town in Ireland. And then I went back and I tried using the baptism records in the same area to match them to the people in the census. And the birth dates were, the dates of baptism and the birth dates as reported in the census were extremely far off. 10, 15 years was not uncommon. So always keep a really healthy cushion in mind when you're looking at dates of birth. Other things that, you know, just as long as the names are lining up, you know, that the names are in the ballpark, the last names are in the ballpark, and the location is correct, then you're probably looking at the correct person. But dates are extremely arbitrary, so keep a very wide cushion on them. Okay, anybody else got any questions? Great. Well, if you think of any questions at all after this presentation, feel free to email me. I'd be very happy to answer them for you. Okay, one last question from Jeremiah. Whoops, there we go. We'll see what that is. Definitely feel free to email me, and I would be happy to try to answer your questions. And again, I'll be back next month. So if you really have something burning question to ask, we can cover it next month as well. So we're waiting for, oops, okay. What did I do? I stopped my screen share, but that's okay. All right.
I think he might
okay, Regina's asking, are there any women listed in either of these resources? The answer is very few, if any. I personally, actually, I'm gonna go back up on that. Foresters, highly doubtful. Immigrant Savings Bank, yes. I do see women listed in that. There are single working women in the United States or in New York working at this time. A lot of, as we know, a lot of young Irish women came to this country to work as domestic servants. So they would have been earning a wage, and they would have wanted to have a way to be able to move that money safely to people in Ireland. So yes, there are women who are listed. There are also women who are listed alongside their husbands. So sometimes you will see a husband's name with a wife's name just beneath it to indicate that she was also on, her name was also on the account. But you do definitely see single women in the Immigrant Savings Bank's records. Okay, yes, Jeremiah, you can email me, that's fine, and ask your question. So I appreciate you all coming out today. Wonderful to see you. And we will be back next month with the 1950 census. And hopefully before we do the presentation, people will have a chance to take a look at it and have their questions ready. So thank you very much, everyone. And look for this video on the library's YouTube channel soon.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks, everyone.
No problem. Bye-bye.